Welcome to Off the Page. It's great to be with you. This episode features the poet and Fordham University professor, Dr. Angela Alaimo O'Donnell. This conversation was such a joy and covers so much ground, from the episode's focus, which is the Catholic imagination, to mortality and the afterlife, to Bruce Springsteen and Flannery O'Connor, to creativity and the imagination's role on our spiritual journeys, as well as her new poetry book, Dear Dante, with Paraclete Press. It is a book that is an imagined conversation with the great Catholic poet, and as she says, the embodiment of the Catholic imagination, Dante, written in response to the 700th anniversary of Dante's death. Angela and I talked for almost 2 hours. So I have edited this down, but I wanted to include as much as possible from our conversation. So much of what she said is ridiculously profound. So there are no reflection segments in this episode. But I do invite you to pause throughout the episode whenever you hear something that stirs your heart or invites you inward into contemplation. So while this conversation focuses on the Catholic imagination, Angela also has a really great story about an experience that she had with Pope Francis. She wrote about it in America Magazine shortly after Pope Francis's death, and you can hear her tell that story in episode 15 of Off the Page. So I encourage you to check that out. A few brief words about Angela. Dr. Angela Alaimo O'Donnell teaches English, creative writing, and courses in American Catholic Studies at Fordham University in New York City. She also serves as Associate Director of Fordham's Curran Center for American Catholic Studies. She's been nominated for or received numerous prizes in poetry, and she also writes essays and reviews of contemporary poetry and literature, which have appeared in publications like Commonweal, Christianity and Literature, as well as America. You're in for a treat with this episode, so let's dive into the conversation. Enjoy. Dr. Angela Alaimo O'Donnell, welcome to the Off the Page podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, which I'm guessing one of the big themes is going to be the Catholic imagination. But to begin, can you tell listeners a little bit about your background and your own passions as an educator and an artist as well?
Absolutely. I'm a professor at Fordham University in New York City. I've been at Fordham for 20 years. I just celebrated my 20th anniversary. And I teach courses in American Catholic Studies, and my field is literature. So we look at literature through the lens of Catholicism and Catholic tradition. And I particularly like to teach courses in the Catholic imagination. I also am the Associate Director of our Curran Center for American Catholic Studies, which is a center that sponsors a lot of events and writers and scholars and artists who come to perform and read and speak to our students. And in addition to that, I have my scholarly life. I write about a lot of American Catholic writers, but my favorite writer of recent years, I've written a number of books on Flannery O'Connor. So she's kind of been my focus, my scholarly focus. And in addition, I'm a poet. I just published my 11th book of poems last spring called Dear Dante, which is a conversation with the great Catholic poet, Dante. So all of these kinds of interests mesh in various ways. And and I'm delighted to be able to talk about them today.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on your 20 years at Fordham, and then on your 11th book of poetry as well, Dear Dante. I've been diving into it. It's a really wonderful book, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well. Can you describe the Catholic imagination to someone perhaps unfamiliar with the term, and then what makes it distinct from other spiritual or creative worldviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. As Catholics, sometimes since we can't get outside of ourselves and we can't get outside of our own tradition, we don't realize the degree to which we are imprinted by a Catholic formation. But when you do kind of take a step outside and think about what we have in common as a result of a Catholic formation, and some of this is generational. I have 3 sons. Their formation was different than mine was, years ago. But nonetheless, there are certain things that still hold true. We have a common language. language. We're 7 years old when we learn words like transubstantiation and concepts like
Mm.
transubstantiation. We learn about mortal and venial sin. We learn about another aspect of Catholic formation is children are exposed to the reality of death very early. We go to church and there's a cross and there's a body on the cross, and it's not something to shy away from. It's a reality of life that young children are not protected from in the way that many American children are. Um,
Hmm.
there's a sense of mortality that we get from a very early age, and trying to see your life not just what's going to happen here, but what happens beyond, because this is not all there is. So Catholics have this long view of, how do we fit into the universe and into eternity, rather than thinking, as a lot of secular Americans do, well, this is it, and there's nothing after this. Um, then we also have this amazing repository of stories that we grow up listening to, week after week, or if you go to daily mass day after day, you hear these Bible stories that are just we're imprinted with, and they're so deep within us, and they're such goads to the imagination. Jesus' parables are just so rich and full of possibility, and we've heard hundreds and thousands of homilies over our lifetime as to how do we read these passages. And then, of course, as a little kid, I remember sitting, in church and not having a clue as to what they were talking about, and you're looking around and like, oh, there are these beautiful stained glass windows in which Bible stories are being acted out. And then there are statues of the saints up there that you learn about and you have affection for. I come from an Italian American family, and we're all about Saint Anthony. Like, Saint Anthony was the go-to saint, and Mary. Um, our formation is very much based around this imagery, these stories, this language. The music, of course, that we grew up with also was very important. I still remember those songs. Nobody sings them anymore, but I still remember those songs that I sang standing next to my mom when I was a little girl, that informed my own sense of, come Holy Ghost, Creator blessed. Like, of course, we always sang that on Pentecost, and I still think of that song on Pentecost, even though no one sings it anymore, or very few people do anyway. So it gives us this gift of music as well. All of this, by the way, is art. Interestingly, goading the imagination, provoking us into imagining God. Because let's face it, we can't see God, we can't taste, touch, feel God. The closest we can come is these artistic representations, these stories, this language that has been given to us. So when a Catholic, I think as Catholics, like, we just have this incredibly rich inheritance. And so as a Catholic artist, then you have that to draw on. And you may not even realize that you're drawing on it, when you're writing poetry or when you're storytelling, because it's just so much a part of your vocabulary and so much a part of your history. And so the Catholic imagination emerges in writers and in artists without them trying. As Flannery O'Connor says, we bring our whole self, our whole person into play when we create something. And good luck trying to screen that out. It's just so deeply embedded in us that we really can't. So the Catholic imagination then manifests itself. I'm really interested to see the ways in which it manifests itself in people who are conscious of it. There are plenty of writers. We were just talking about the great Murray Bodo. Obviously, he's very conscious of his Catholic imagination, but then there are writers who may not be, but it's still very much a part of who they are. So I'll use a very popular example that I like to use with my students is Bruce Springsteen, who grew up in Freehold, New Jersey. He went to Catholic school. Our St. Rose of Lima Church was his church. They called it Lima. He was an altar boy. He went to Catholic school. He was not a good kid. He misbehaved very badly. He got thrown off the altar boys. Nonetheless, he was imprinted by this experience of growing up in the Catholic Church, of being at all the weddings and all the funerals, and understanding this kind of liturgical life that his whole family and his whole town really was invested in. And for a long time, he didn't acknowledge that. But in recent years, he wrote a memoir a few years ago called Born to Run, in which he talks about, like, it was really my first experience of beauty. It was a dark beauty. This was pre-Vatican II Catholicism, right? It was a dark beauty. It was a mystery I didn't understand. And that's something
Hmm.
at the core of me as an artist. And then when you take a look at Springsteen's lyrics, his favorite word, I think, is redemption. They're
Hmm.
not one song that he writes that is not in some way about redemption. He writes about sin. He writes about loss. He writes about this search for something beyond himself that sometimes can't get named. His songs are songs, often anthems of social justice, which are very much in keeping, especially with my younger students. That's their passion. Um, and it's again, it's he's not conscious of it, but that's part of who he is because of that Catholic formation that he had. So I think once we start looking in our culture, we see that there's a lot of the Catholic imagination there. We just may not recognize it until know what to look for.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a big Springsteen fan. I've especially last year I just had Born to Run and Born in the USA. Those two albums just on constantly in our household. And do you have a favorite song or a song that lyrically of his to you that really kind of captures the Catholic imagination, the paradox, the you mentioned the darkness, the beauty, the mystery. Does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, there are actually a number of them, and now, of course, now that you're asking me, they're like all fleeing out of my head. This always happens. I'm thinking of the song though, in which it's a mantra really in the song where the chorus is this train has saints and sinners. This train has
Mm,
whores and gamblers. This train has lost souls. This train. So it's the idea of it's the glory train. It's the train to heaven, and it's very Catholic. Here comes everybody. We're all saints and sinners. This is not this is a train that does not exclude people. Quite the contrary, it includes people. And I can't remember the name of that, but it will come to me. The other one that I always think of, it's one of his most poignant songs. Like it's a poem in many ways. Springsteen, this is another thing. He is a great lyricist. He's one of the great lyricists. And Bob Dylan won a Nobel Prize, but I think Bruce could also win one if they wanted to give it to another lyricist. But he has a song that he wrote. It's called American Skin, and it is about a young man who was killed by the police in the late 1990s, might have been 1998, 99. He was an immigrant named Amadou Diallo. And this happened right here in the Bronx. He went to reach for his wallet, and the police thought he was trying to go for a gun, and he was killed. He was shot 31 times, and it was one of the first instances. It wasn't a first, but it was one of the first instances that the news paid attention to of this sort of overkill, on the part of the police towards this young African American man. And he wrote this beautiful anthem called American Skin, and the subtitle is 41 Shots. And it's just it is this melodic, almost lullaby, telling the story of this young man. And it keeps on repeating 41 shots, just to remind us so we don't forget, that crucifixion, basically. It's a crucifixion of an innocent. Um, and it's just so touching and so moving. And again, all of the lyrics, they're about, we're baptized in these waters, and we're baptized in each other's blood. The sense of our own complicity in these kinds of injustices when they happen. And Springsteen was doing this in the late 1990s. This is before the Black Lives Matter movement. He was using his art to be prophetic, basically, to look and see what is happening in our culture, what is happening in our society that needs to be paid attention to. So it's kind of like an open wound. Interestingly, the New York Police Department did not like this, as you might imagine. When he did a concert and a couple of years later at Madison Square Garden, they did not want to provide security for him if he sang the song, and he sang the song anyway, because it's something that needed to be heard.
he's the
So
boss. He has to.
he's the boss. Yes, yeah. So I think of that. I mean, one of my categories that we use when I talk about the Catholic imagination with my students is like almost all of these people have this prophetic quality to them, this need to speak out, and when they see injustice, they have to. I mean, they can't not use their art for that. And so Springsteen is up there with Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton and Czesław Milosz and a number of the other writers that we're reading who do that. And yeah, so he's one of lots of examples, that we can point to.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm out of my depth here, but I thought I read somewhere that isn't Born in the USA, isn't that actually a anti-war anthem? I mean, we always play that on the 4th of July and you crack open your beer and you celebrate America, but it's a critique of America's involvement in Vietnam, isn't it? Am I on track there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bruce had run across the book that was written by Ron Kovic, who was a Vietnam vet who came back, and then he happened to meet Kovic, and he said, I need to write about this. This is again the prophetic. This is so, and Springsteen also was of age. He was actually drafted, and he was terrified, along with all the other kids his age, in his town. And I can't remember, there was some sort of technicality that he did not actually have to go. And he talks about this in his Broadway show on Netflix, which is really worth watching. It's a beautiful, beautiful tribute to the Catholic imagination. But he talks about the guilt that he has had all of his life because somebody else went in his place. And
Hmm.
he's, of course, happy to be alive and happy to be here and happy to have children and have a productive life. But he knows people that died. And so the book really struck him personally, because it tells the story of somebody who, went off and just disappeared, and never came back, and his brother, trying to deal with it. And but the interesting thing about the song is when we hear it is that it's that hard driving, like Bruce anthem, over the top. And if you don't listen to the words, you don't realize the story that's being told. So my favorite performance of that, you can find it on YouTube, is the one that he did at the Madison Square Garden concert in 2001. He slows it way down. He plays it alone with his 12-string guitar, and it is this haunting, haunting song. And then you hear the story. So yeah, that's so interesting to me, the way that he sort of uses the music to mask what it is that's being said.
Yes. And that, I mean, would you say that that's not to oversimplify it, but that's part of the paradox of the Catholic imagination, right? I mean, he a song like that, I mean, it gets you going, like it gets you really excited. It feel like you said, it feels like a classic Springsteen anthem. However, there's these darker undertones that really invite you into contemplation and action and considering the real pain that people at that time were going through. Yeah, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, the other things that I think makes a Catholic person with a Catholic imagination is there really is this need to look into the darkness. I mentioned earlier this early um, familiarity that we develop with death as if we're, raised Catholic. Um, and it's something that, if you're going to do what Flannery tells us we have to do and live hotly in pursuit of the real, that's hotly in pursuit of the darkness. And so a lot of Catholic writers, I keep using Flannery as an example, so I'll just mention her stories. There are some people who find her stories really, they're very, very troubling, because terrible things happen in them. Serial killers show up. People have all sorts of painful disabilities. People get, there are murders. People get attacked. Things get stolen. I mean, they're just all of these stories about pain and suffering. And again, O'Connor, first of all, she was writing about the world she knew. She's writing about the South and, the 50s and the 60s. A lot of the stories she writes, she actually would read the newspaper and find, like, oh, that happened. I'm going to now, put this into a story. And O'Connor's way of thinking about darkness and violence was that it was everybody's in need of grace. We're all in need of grace. We're all in need of forgiveness. But most of us are not willing to recognize that it's being offered to us, and we don't think we need it because we think we're all right by ourselves, right? And so all of her characters, as she said, their heads are so hard that it's got to be something really shocking to get through to them. So she uses violence as a means to wake her characters up to the reality of their life, and their
Hmm.
need for grace. And but some readers really have a hard time with her because she does take you to dark places in the stories. And she also has a wicked sense of humor. So interwoven in these almost tragic, seemingly tragic stories is this, like, very, very wry Southern humor. So yeah, I think that there is this quality in a lot of Catholic writers, of needing to look into the darkness. How do we make it bearable? How do we, and one way to make it bearable is to write a song with a sound that people are going to find compelling, because they'll listen
Hmm.
to the song and then, oh, what's going on in this song? Or they'll be sucked into the story by the humor in the first few paragraphs, and the quirkiness of these people, and then, oh my gosh, like, where is it that we've been taken to? And I don't think it's a sleight of hand. I think it's a sense of a worldview in which all of these things are of a piece. Yeah, I mean, the greatest artists do this. Shakespeare's, tragedies are full of humor, and his comedies are full of tragedy, because that's life. And Shakespeare, I think, also was a closet Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of my favorite novelists is Kurt Vonnegut, and I mean, he doesn't have a Catholic background, I don't think, but he similarly, I mean, he uses the absurd and science fiction to, I mean, the humor is what carries you into this confrontation with the real, because then he gets incredibly dark. And but the humor makes it bearable, at least for me. And it's he'll have a line that just like, oh my goodness, that is. But I mean, he had a very dark past too. I mean, he was a prisoner of war in Dresden, I think, in World War II. He his what was it? I think his sister passed away. And he took her kids in and raised them. His mom committed suicide. I mean, so he, I guess I'm just piggybacking off of what you said, is that he's using art as a way to cope with his own trauma. It feels like that to me, at least, and it makes life bearable to him, and it helps make life bearable to me too.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of a Catholic version of Vonnegut is, I think he's very much influenced by Vonnegut, is Walker Percy, um, who also had a kind of scientific bent, the way that, and also has this, like, he likes to write satire. So one of my favorite books by him is a very Vonnegut-esque book called Love in the Ruins. And it's a sort of a science fiction, imagining like what the end of the world is going to look like. And it's funny, it's crazy, it's out, and it's witty, it's satiric. But at the end of it, I mean, and I think this is one of the things that distinguishes Percy from Vonnegut, is like there really is this desire for God. There's this
Hmm.
Christian vision, this Catholic vision that Percy is trying to get at the center of. No matter how broken and how flawed all of these people are, the only thing that makes sense is the Eucharist. The only thing that makes sense is God, because we are so messed up, that obviously we cannot handle it. So there's this, this, again, this sense of redemption that comes in, as despite all of the madness. There's a reason for suffering. Um, it's not just a mad, mad world. It is a mad, mad world, but there's also a kind of sanity, that you can find in it.
Yeah, yeah. You said something earlier that I'd never thought about before. I grew up Catholic, and I don't think I've ever really thought about how the art and the reverence of the Mass, and then, like you said, the crucifix there, front and center. you know, I mean, I don't think I've ever thought about how this real confrontation with mortality at a young age has shaped my life as an artist. That is very interesting. I mean, I remember, I remember, I guess I was born to love theology or something, because I remember in kindergarten, my parents were watching Touched by an Angel. You remember that show?
Yes, I do. I do. Yeah.
And I was just like, I think seeing that, and then the experiences at mass, and then learning at Catholic grade school, like I was just haunted by the afterlife and angels and demons, and all these supernatural forces. And eventually I remember my parents just being like, I think you need to talk to your teacher about this. Like, he's not letting this go. Like, you need to talk to your teacher. But I remember that. I remember that like it was yesterday. Like, it was a very um it feels so real and vivid to me still that already at a young age you're confronting these really dark elements about what it means to be alive. I mean, do you do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's a necessary or important thing? Or what would you say to someone who critiques that and says, I don't know if kids should be exposed to that at that age.
It's a lot. And I think that uh, there are a couple of different ways to answer that question.
Yeah.
It is too much in many ways. I had a similar experience to yours. I think for very sensitive children and children who have a lot of imagination, it can be a burden. It's like, oh my gosh. And then on top of that, my dad died when I was only 8, and
Mm,
so
mm,
I was in my era, like we were taught hell. I mean, hell was a real thing, and not that it's not a real thing, but it's not so much taught to young children anymore as it used to be. And So I was just haunted by this idea. My dad also part of this Italian American community that we're in. Like men didn't go to church. Religion was like women's work, and so I was taught in CCD classes that if you don't go to church, that's a mortal sin, and if you don't,
yeah, I remember that too. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
you're done, right? And so I was like searching and searching for some sort of way to get my father out of hell, but I didn't think I could. And that was
Mm,
my hope that he was in purgatory. So I would say all of these prayers that would try to, lessen his time in purgatory. And that was a lot for an 8-year-old. And my mom was so, tied up in her own grief. And I had 4 brothers and sisters that like I wasn't able to tell anybody about this. I really just suffered with it. Um, so am I thinking that that's a good thing? Not necessarily, but I don't also know that it's a bad thing. Um,
yeah.
I feel as though, I mean, all of us walk our journeys, and I feel as though I was imprinted at 8 years old. I feel like I grew up when I was 8. I feel like that was kind of
Hmm.
the end of my childhood. Um,
Yep.
and I probably would not have become a writer. I think writing was one of the refuges that I took as a way of trying to deal with this complexity. And then, of course, as I got older, I found ways to deal with, and think my way through some of these things that were hard to deal with. So, so yeah, it's not an easy childhood, I would say, necessarily. But childhood is in most times and places never been easy. I mean, as Americans, we have this desire to protect our children and to keep them from being too bothered by anything. But I teach a lot of young people, like between the ages of 18 to 22, and they're troubled. A lot of them are very troubled. And I don't know that. And again, this is across the board. This is people who have been raised with faith and those who have not. I just think it's part of the human condition that we're eventually have to deal with, with what it is to be a human being. And one of the things that Catholicism gives us is, first of all, hope. It's like, so when your father dies, at least, there's eternal life. You're going to see him again, if you can find your way to thinking that he's in heaven or purgatory rather than in hell. Um, and this is not all there is. And there's more to this world than is dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. You just and so that kind of humility before the largeness of the universe, I think, helps you to deal with mystery, helps you to deal with all of the mystery you're going to be encountering for the rest of your life. Yeah, so when my own children were, born, of course, baptized them. They went to Catholic school, and I wanted them to have that same sense of the world meaning something, that I was able to grow up with, and I believe myself, and that's the best gift that you can do as a parent is to pass on the faith, whatever your faith might happen to be, to your children. And of course, it's up to them to believe, to follow, and not to follow. You have no control over that as a parent. But it's a framework. Uh,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and then like on the flip side when I think about it, I mean, it was the art that I mentioned and the reverence, like I said as well, and even like the visceral like smells of like the incense, and then the cadence of like Holy Week and Stations of the Cross every Friday. I mean, the rhythm of that and this in this continual confrontation with mystery. Like you said, I mean, you learn the word transubstantiation when you're like a second grader. Like I think I learned it when I was in second grade, and that's mystery. It made no sense to my mind then, but it's mystery. Like it's a invitation into um, a magical world in a sense, magic in the best term, so I'm like the worst Catholic ever. Like like a year after I was confirmed, I got baptized Protestant, and kind of went the evangelical route, and really had a good experience. I'm thankful for that part of my spiritual journey. But now, kind of full circle, I mean, as I reflect on that, and I learned a lot about Catholicism in my breaking down of some Protestant theology that wasn't very helpful for me. But the thing that I missed in this kind of evangelical phase of my life, one of the things I missed was the art. you know, in the evangelicals, they do some really incredible art too, like with music and they're real emotive kind of preaching. There's some positive aspects of that too, but it was so incredibly refreshing to step into mass again and the reverence, the art, the yeah, you've got my mind spinning right now because there is so much there to experience that as a child. Um, yeah, it has to do something subconsciously to your imagination, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the Catholic imagination and like people who theorize about it, there's a theologian whose name is David Tracy, and he talks about these kind of two poles of ways of being in the world. There's the analogical imagination, and then there's the dialectical imagination. And the analogical imagination is the Catholic imagination or the sacramental imagination. And that's the imagination that sees meaning in everything, that sees God inhering in the world, all around us, in each other, the Imago Dei. And there's this trust in the imagination, right? There's this trust that God is there. As the Jesuit poets, Gerard Manley Hopkins writes, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. So there's this absolute conviction, God in all things. And then there's the dialectical side, which is associated with Protestantism, which is a distrust
Hmm.
of imagination, and also a distrust of things, a distrust of statues and like, do you worship Mary? Of scapulars and rosaries and all of these things. And so it's a kind of foreign way to thinking, I think, to a Catholic to think that way, but also I think to a Protestant, a Catholic way of thinking is definitely. Um, in fact, I'd love to read you a little paragraph from this book that I teach all the time by Andrew Greeley.
Yeah, please, that'd be great. Yeah.
It's
Sorry,
the,
say the book again.
it's called The
What's
Catholic
this from?
Imagination. And it's by Andrew Greeley, who was a lovely man. He was a priest, a sociologist at the University of Chicago for many years, and also a novelist. Um, but this book is it's a lovely exploration of the ways of the enchanted imagination, the ways in which Catholics see the world. But I really just love the opening paragraph where he says, Catholics live in an enchanted world, a world of statues and holy water, stained glass and votive candles, saints and religious medals, rosary beads, and holy pictures. But these Catholic paraphernalia are mere hints of a deeper and more pervasive religious sensibility, which inclines Catholics to see the holy lurking in creation. As Catholics, we find our houses and our world haunted by a sense that the objects, events, and persons of daily life are revelations of grace. And I just think this is such a succinct and beautiful description of the analogical imagination, the sacramental imagination, the Catholic imagination.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, even in my evangelical days, I don't want to paint that experience like it was bad, because it really brought me to Merton. It brought me to Henry Now, and it brought me to the mystics, because I had to break some stuff down. But even in my evangelical days, I mean, we were even taught to like distrust your own emotions. Like there was this really big disconnect between anything that's embodied, anything sacramental around you, in this object being God, who can really only be accessed through church or scripture, you know. So, yeah, but I didn't realize that growing up Catholic, that it is a sacramental reality that you're walking into. All the statues, all the prayers, all the holidays, all the like I mentioned, the rhythm cadence of Holy Week. I mean, it's it's a really beautiful thing to think about your material reality being so enchanted, you
Hmm.
know? And
Absolutely.
that has to be positive for a child's psychology, I would think.
Yeah, I think so too. That just this kind of sense in which everything means something, you know, everything is
Yeah.
full of possibility. And even time is enchanted, you know, time is liturgical, time is holy and blessed. There's nothing that isn't holy. And so that wholeness of life, that fullness of life, I think is it's just a very rich life. And I don't think Catholics are the only ones that have it. I think, for example, that very observant Jews also have this because of that sense of, you know, you have this Shabbat every every Friday. You know, you set aside everything, and then you just do this ritual meal with your family, and you do no work. You just devote yourself to God, you know, for the next 24 hours, and of course all of the high holy days throughout the Jewish liturgical year. Very, very beautiful. And again, that fullness of life, the wholeness of life, in which all of this means something, I think is you know very different from certainly the saintless calendar of days that secular people live, and entirely secular people live, and also a lot of Protestantism. I too had a period where I I went over to the other side out of curiosity, I think. And the thing that I really appreciated from that is, you know, as Catholics, we're just terrible with the Bible. Like
Yeah.
we hear the same stories week after week. We don't read the Bible, and I just like I loved the fact that Protestants read the Bible. So I learned all books of the Bible, and I read freely in it, and it was like this is it. Whereas to contrast this, I remember being with my mom once. We were at her hairdresser's house, and I picked up a Bible, and I said, "What is this, Mom?" And she said, "Oh, that's a Protestant Bible. Put that down." I was like, "Don't touch that. Don't touch that. Something bad might happen." Because the Catholic attitude was like, "You don't read that by yourself. You just listen to what they read in church, but you don't read the Bible." So that was a real breakout for me to be able to like read scripture and you know appreciate the Bible in a way that I don't think I would have if I just continued to you know be in the Catholic Church. And then, of course, when I did go back, I brought with me this wonderful revelation, you know, that there's a big Bible out there that a lot of us don't know anything about.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, and then one thing I'm really grateful for from my kind of evangelical wanderings, as well as the personal nature of prayer, you know, which someone like Francis of Assisi really intuited. But I mean, I don't think I realized growing up Catholic that I could pick up the Bible and read it, or that I could just pray and tell God what's on my heart or mind, you know, and talk to God like God's a friend. And so, I mean, it's very interesting because those are on ramps to a sacramental reality too. They probably wouldn't use that language, but it is. It's like God's right here. God's here in the present moment, and you can talk to God anytime you want, and you can open and read sacred scripture anytime you want. There's a dark side to it as well, because I think the Bible itself becomes its own God, and theology and you know dogma and certainty, the drug of certainty when people are interpreting, or when I mean I thought that I had all the answers when I was going deep into it, you know, but I had this renewed love for scripture, and it came alive in the mass when I returned because of my knowledge for the Bible that I learned in my evangelical kind of journey. Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that Flannery O'Connor writes about in one of her essays, she writes wonderful essays about her work as well as, you know, the work itself. She grew up and lived most of her life in the Protestant South. In Georgia, where she lived, there were very few Catholics. So she and her family were the exception to the rule. But she loved living among evangelical Protestants because they knew their Bible.
Hmm.
And then, of course, she knew the Bible. And so many of her stories engage in very interesting ways, scripture, in a way that a lot of Catholic writers don't, because her formation was both as a Catholic, but also as a Southern Catholic in the evangelical world. Um, so she says, like, I have this whole vocabulary and this whole set of stories that I can draw on, that, most Catholic writers don't have. Yeah, so I think that that's very interesting. In general, we don't do a great job with education. So, like, growing up, like, I didn't know anything about the way that St. Francis prayed or the way that St. Ignatius prayed. I had to wait to become an adult, and an academic, to learn about these things. And I think that's one of the things in the church that we need to figure out how to do better. Like, we just have this amazing, rich tradition. We have this Catholic intellectual tradition. We have this Catholic uh, artistic tradition, aesthetic tradition, and it's so rich. But many Catholics don't know anything about it. Which is one of the reasons that we have, like, I teach at a Catholic university, but we have a Catholic studies minor, because a lot of our Catholic students, they come into our classes and it's like, wow, I never knew any of this stuff. Um, Only place that they can find it, So, yeah, so it would be lovely to find a way to make more of this available to Catholics because it's such a gift.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the Catholic imagination here, and you mentioned your childhood, how you really felt like you had to grow up at 8 years old after the passing of your father. And I was just curious, I mean, how does the Catholic imagination show up in your work? Or this, I mean, words are going to fall short here of the trauma you and your siblings experienced in your youth, but I mean, at a very formative time going through something so dark. I mean, I cannot begin to fathom. I mean, how do all these paradoxes and mystery and darkness and light, I mean, the Catholic imagination, how does it show up in your work as a poet?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually one of the reasons I got interested in this subject of the Catholic imagination and the idea of, like, reading Catholic writers is when I started to, examine my own work and think, like, am I a Catholic writer? I mean, I just thought of myself as a
Mm,
writer, but then it was like, I'm reading all of these other Catholic writers and I'm seeing elements of their Catholicism, like, it must be in my work too somehow. So it was motivated in part by, just self-discovery. What am I doing unconsciously that makes my work Catholic? Um, and one of the things I think that's really important about that early imprinting is, learning to deal with darkness, learning to deal with sorrow and loss and death, and figure out where to put that is been that, like, my first couple of books. That's what they're narratives. They're family narratives. They're narratives about growing up in the place that I grew up, northeastern Pennsylvania, which at that time was coal mining country, and it was very poor, a very hard scrabble place. There were accidents, mining accidents, all the time. My grandfather from Sicily was dead at the age of 33 from black lung and influenza. I mean, where we lived in Wyoming Valley, I mean, it's kind of macabre. There were many people, so many miners that had black lung that when you went into a person's house, there would be your uncle or your grandfather or your father sitting in the corner on oxygen, and he kind of lived
mm,
in the living room with his oxygen because he couldn't go up the stairs anymore. And we didn't think anything of that. It's like, oh yeah, there's your uncle. Hi, how you doing? Because, like, we thought everybody lived that way, but they didn't. We didn't realize how dysfunctional it was. So it was very interesting to me as I got to be an adult and I got out of that world and I realized, oh, that was exceptional. That was an exceptional place with a lot of suffering. Everybody was Catholic where I grew up because you were either our diversity was you were Italian, you were Irish, or you were Polish, because those were all the people who came to work in the mines. And the one thing we did share, even though we had these different cultures, different languages, is the fact that we were all Catholic, and we had this, even though our churches were as different as could be, also the art in the churches. Um, but it was still this kind of, that was the backbone of our world, and suffering was just a part of everybody's vocabulary, a part of everybody's life. This kind of brokenness that you had to learn to deal with, and so I think poetry gave me one way to deal with that brokenness. Like I'm going to tell these stories. I'm going to, and in some sense, it's like, you know, you're a reporter, like I'm going to tell about it, but you're also a myth maker in many ways because you're trying to see meaning in what it is that has happened to you and has happened to the people that you love and has happened to this place. So a lot of my early poems sort of will put the coal mining region into the context of other places, like, you know, ancient Greece, or, you know, other places and other times where there have been other families that disaster has befallen. So it's, you know, it is a way for us, those people who like to write, like to recreate art, to see our own personal suffering as part of this larger universe of suffering and of what it is to be a human. Um, so I think those in the early poems, that's the ways in which my Catholic imagination manifests itself. And also, it's just, I remember saying to somebody after my first book came out, so like, do you think this feels like a Catholic book? And it's like, oh, yes. So much imagery, you know, the statues and
Yeah.
crucifixes everywhere, the even the language, it's, and again, I didn't deliberately say, well, I'm going to insert my Catholic imagination here. It was just that's the milieu I grew up in, and it's going to come out in the work. Yeah, so, but it keeps on changing. Then as every book is different, you know, over the last however many years I've been writing, and it comes out in other ways in other books. So, for example, I went into the Holy Land a few years ago in 2019, right before COVID, and that was fascinating because I got to go to all of these places that were so storied in my imagination. I had heard about the Sea of Galilee. I had heard about the Dead Sea. I had heard about Bethlehem, and here I was, like standing on the ground, you know, that the very ground where Jesus walked. And it was so powerful because I began to feel like I was seeing him in the landscape. And so I wrote a series of poems that are called Christ sightings, which are like places where I felt the ongoing presence of Christ there, and was like reimagining classic stories and seeing them from different perspectives. So that's again a way in which my Catholic imagination was, you know, operating without my wanting it to. This is just what it did. And so I just felt like I was the scribe, you know, I was writing down. Some cases I didn't have a pencil with me. I'm like typing myself email poems so that I didn't forget. Yeah, and so that's another manifestation of, you know, the way the Catholic imagination has emerged in my work.
Absolutely. Yeah, how has poetry helped you to find healing in your own life, or, you know, to navigate the darkness of life? How has poetry been a guide for you in that regard?
Well, you know, I think one of the reasons poets like to write, and I think everybody should write poetry, by the way. I give my students the choice at the end of the semester to write a research paper or to write a series of 14 sonnets. They've never written sonnets before, and a lot of them take up the offer because they think, well, I can. That's a lot easier than writing a paper, right? That's only 196 lines of poetry instead of a 14-page paper, right? And then, of course, they very quickly find out that it's not easier; it's harder. But they also fall in love with the process of writing, because, you know, especially writing in form. There's a lot of the stuff in the universe that we can't control, but I can control what's going on in these 14 lines. I can control the
Yeah.
rhymes, I can control the cadence, I can control the story that I'm telling. And that is very empowering. It's also very healing, because you know, obviously expression is a form of being able to, people who do therapy know this. It's a way of trying to heal whatever suffering and sorrow you might be having. I learned this when my mother was dying, for example. There's a book that I wrote, which is called Waking My Mother. And this is actually a picture of her on the cover when she was about 7 years old. And we had a very complicated relationship. She was a very, very complicated mother. But when she was dying down in Florida, I was here in New York and I could not be with her. There were a couple of big snowstorms. I couldn't get a flight out, and she was undergoing surgery, and I didn't know what to do. My sisters were down there with her, my brothers, but I was here. And so I sat down. I thought, I'm going to write a poem. I'm going to write a poem about my mother, and and then that wasn't enough. I wrote one poem. So then I wrote a second poem. I actually took the line of the last sonnet, the last line of the sonnet, and I started the next sonnet with that line, and then I wrote.
Hmm.
And then I took the last line of that one and I wrote another one. And before I knew it, I had a 15 sonnet crown. It's called the crown of sonnets. And I had no idea what I was going to say in that. The story just sort of poured out of me and gave me an opportunity to think about things I had not thought about for a long time. And it was pulled out of me by the form, by writing these lines one after another, by finding the right rhymes, by finding the right cadences. Um, and a sonnet, I love sonnets. The sonetti means a little song, and these are actually little pieces of music. They're meant to be performed. They're meant to be read out loud, not to be read silently. And so there's that relief that we get from music when we write poetry as well. That I think is again very healing and very sacramental, as Saint Augustine says. You know, sing once, pray twice. There's the quality of prayer that goes into the devotion that we show when we're working hard on making our art.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. I mean, this is certainly true in memoir and any storytelling as well, but particularly with poetry, I love that as you're writing it, you usually don't know where it's going. So there's this element of surprise that is you're uncovering something potentially that you had no idea was even there. And to me, there's so much healing in that too. Like you're certainly not controlling the river. You're not pushing the river, as Richard Rohr says. Like you're entering into the flow of it and you're seeing where it takes you. I mean, that certainly comes out in poetry. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it, it just always seems to surprise me what comes up in the creative process. And with my passion's memoir, and it's similar there too. It's like, gosh, I had no idea that was there, but it's there and I'm reading it.
Yeah,
You
no,
know?
it's true. It's a process of discovery, and it's an act of faith, really. You turn yourself over to the
Yes.
process. And Czesław Miłosz has a wonderful poem, the great Nobel Prize winning Polish Catholic poet, called Ars Poetica, in which he says, sometimes when he says it much better than this, but I'm paraphrasing. Sometimes when you write, a tiger has sprung out of you, and it stands there in the light, lashing its tail. Like, where did that come from? So writing
Wow.
poetry can be a terrifying experience because you say things sometimes that you didn't know that you thought, and you might not even want other people to read it. But you have to have faith in the process. And as Pope Francis says, in his letter that he read to us, you have to have faith in the imagination. He uses the word the superabundance and overflowing, and you have to be able to pursue that superabundance, because if you hold back, you're missing it. You're missing the fire. You're missing the divine that is, because the divine is super abundant, and the imagination is a channeling of the divine. So I love Milosh's statement on this. I also love Frost, who's no Catholic, but he was a great poet, who said, no surprise in the reader. I'm sorry, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. No tears in
Hmm.
the writer, no tears in the reader. So unless you're surprised, you cannot expect your reader to be surprised by what comes out. So you have to be just faithful to this impulse that you have, this imaginative impulse when you write.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. So you recently wrote a poetry book based on Dante's Divine Comedy. Got it right here. Paraclete Press. Where does this book fit into this conversation about the Catholic imagination?
Yeah, well, of course, Dante is the great Catholic poet, and we most of us who are in college or studied literature, we've read Dante at various times throughout our our career. And I think most people think, okay, he lived 700 years ago. Catholicism was very different then. He has a medieval mind, you know. He's like another kind of creature. Plus, he writes in Italian. Most of us don't read Italian. So there are a lot of barriers that might separate us from Dante. He's like a star up in the heavens, like Shakespeare, you know. So, but I was rereading Dante for a couple of reasons. For one thing, I run a Dante reading group on campus at Fordham. So we've been slowly reading Dante one canto at a time for 10 years. Um,
Oh, cool.
we just got finished with, we're just in the third canto of Purgatorio. So this is how slowly we're going. So I've been just rereading Dante slowly with other professors and students. And then it was the 700th anniversary of Dante's death a couple of years ago and the anniversary of the Commedia. So I thought, you know, I'm going to spend the summer just like rereading the Divine Comedy, one canto a day, 100 cantos, 100 days in summer, you know, it's going to work. And then I found myself talking back to Dante because time is my writing time. And so if I started the day reading Dante, then I'd start like a poem that would like jump off of one of the events that happens in the Inferno or in the Purgatorio or in the Paradiso. I didn't intend to write a book. I really just intended to, okay, I'm just going to engage Dante in conversation and see in what ways we're alike, and in which ways we're different. And then, you know, again, before I knew it, I had this collection of poems and then I, you know, kind of deliberately shaped it. There are 13 poems devoted to Inferno, 13 to Purgatorio, 13 to Paradiso, and then a couple of poems at the beginning and the end. Um, and, you know, some of the poems are, you know, homage to Dante. Some of them are asking Dante questions, differing with Dante. And so it was a really fun way to engage this and feel like was establishing some sort of friendship with Dante. Um,
Sure.
I mean, I hope one day when I meet him in eternity, he's gonna like think that this was okay. um,
He'll be like, before we meet, you have to go through the three levels.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was a labor of love, and I really enjoyed doing it. And it gave me also a chance to do some interesting formal things. Dante wrote in a number of forms, but his favorite forms were the sonnet and then terza rima, which he invented actually for the Commedia. So I thought, well, this is fun. I get to try to write in terza rima, and I put my own stamp on it. You know, Dante's verse, except you know, it's different in each of the cantos, but um, it tends to be more elevated and refined, especially in Purgatorio and in Paradiso. And there's a sort of, you know, mellifluous quality to his Italian, certainly, and also to the English translations. And I was trying to write in language that was going to feel very contemporary, and maybe a little bit, how shall I say, a little bit off the cuff, a little bit. Um, I'm, Words are escaping me. You know, a little bit bratty at times, a little
Hmm.
bit brat,
Hmm.
in terms of, you know, critiquing some of the theology that Dante offers us. Because obviously
Yeah.
we've changed a lot in 700 years.
Sure. Yeah, a little bit. But what did you learn about yourself as you wrote this book, or creatively as an artist? What opened up for you as you wrote Dear Dante?
Well, I learned a lot about Dante, and one of the things I really love about Dante is, even though he's creating this, you know, this theological universe, which is all about justice, it's also about mercy and it's also about love. And so often in all three of the levels, you know, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, Dante is like weeping. He weeps with compassion for the sinners that he finds. I think Dante has a reputation for being like very harsh because he puts all of these people in hell. But the fact is, he first of all he believes his world. You have to grant an artist his worldview, but his response to Paolo and Francesca is to weep. He weeps at the suicides. He at times he can't even speak. He asks Virgil, "Would you please speak for me? I can't speak." Virgil is, of course, his guide through Inferno and Purgatorio. So I just love the fact that Dante was able to separate himself. But Dante the pilgrim is different from Dante the poet. And that to me is like just masterful in terms of his ability to tell the story in that way. And then, of course, the language is just it's just spectacular. He's so inventive and he's so alive. His language is so alive. Any poet would kill to write like Dante. So to just have the opportunity to spend time in the presence of this master, was just a joy. And even though I felt a little embarrassed putting my little poems next to Dante's great big poem, but I thought I would ask for forgiveness after I did that. But in the meantime, just go ahead with the gesture and I mostly though I enjoyed the process, of being able to engage in conversation with Dante, just like I enjoy the process of being able to engage in conversation with Pope Francis. Like we meet greatness on the page, or we meet greatness in real life, and it's hopefully some of Dante's excellence has rubbed off on me. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a storyteller, so like I'm always making connections. So if there's nothing here, you can just be like, "Shut up, next question." but but I mean, I found it interesting. I mean, and thank you, by the way, for talking about your childhood and opening up in our conversation. We were talking about our Catholic backgrounds and how you were really kind of tortured. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but at least haunted by this aspect of the afterlife. And then it's interesting to me, in Dear Dante, I mean, Dante's Inferno, this is all about this journey, this traversing through the layers of the afterlife. Is there any connection or healing there, or what are your thoughts what rises up within you as I ask that question?
Yeah, that's actually a wonderful question. To what extent is this a personal sort of journey that I'm
Yeah.
trying to, yeah, I think a couple of the revelations for me was, I'd read Dante previously, but this was a different kind of way of reading him, kind of reading him like I felt like I was a co-creator, I was, you know, I was looking at Inferno as a person who was really trying to figure out what it meant for me. Um,
Mm.
and most of the sinners in hell, it's not that they were sinners, it's just that they love their sin and they don't want to give it up. They really they want to be there. And that is comes as a comfort, I think, to all of us because we're all sinners. But recognizing it is the first step towards being able to be redeemed, right? And then purgatory is so much gentler than any purgatory I had ever imagined as a child. It's arduous. The souls have to work in order, but they have hope, and that's what's so important. And the difference between Inferno, abandon hope, all ye who enter here, is written over the gates of Inferno. And like, well, what's worse than living without hope? Like that's just eternity of suffering, as opposed to the Purgatorio, which is like, oh no, this is the land of hope. This is a kinder, gentler sea that Dante finds his boat heading towards. Um, so then we see Dante, make this journey, and you feel like, okay, even if who knows if purgatory is a reality, um, it's going to be very different than any of us imagines it's going to be, right? And then of course the Paradiso, which is this magnificent, like almost like I use the expression, it's like Lucy in the sky with diamonds. It's like this incredible.
Yes. I
Um,
love that in the introduction. Yeah, that that's a great description. Yeah.
It's crazy, that stuff that Dante is able to come up with, in terms of describing it. And my favorite part of the Paradiso is there's a moment where Beatrice takes Dante up into the Imperium, and he's able to look down at all the spheres, and he sees the whole complexity of the universe. Um, well, actually, maybe I'll read that poem. Would that be
That'd
okay?
be great. Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you to read a couple. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful moment where, he really gets a vision of everything. And then he sees Earth. And Earth is this tiny, tiny little speck. And he talks about the fact that, there's the threshing floor in which we are all so savage to each other. And so it's just this moment of recognition of this other way of looking at ourselves. Where, of course, we think we're at the center of the universe, and we think that all of our loves and our hatreds and our politics and like, oh, everything's just the worst. And Dante's kind of like, do you realize how infinitesimal you are? So this poem is called Dante's Smile, and each of the poems begins with an epigraph from whatever book of the Commedia. This comes from Paradiso 22. And Dante says, "My eyes returned through all the seven spheres and saw this globe in such a way that I smiled at its scrawny image. The little threshing floor that so incites our savagery was all, from hills to river mouths, revealed to me." And this is called Dante's Smile, and this is written in terza rima. The astronauts who saw the Earth wept. Hanging in the black of space, it shone like the prize they thought it was, a secret kept from ordinary men. They saw our home in all of its blue beauty and its charm. Truth they guessed, but hadn't fully known. But Dante saw it clearer, saw the harm we do ourselves and to the ones we love. He was surprised, utterly disarmed, to see from such a distance, so far above, the pettiness and the violence of our days, viciousness by even him undreamt of. And from his perch in heaven, in his days, he smiled, as the Creator must smile too, to see our vanity, the brazen ways we do the things we're not supposed to do, and still think mercy's what we ought to get. Though surely Dante's smile is full of rue, a man who knows remorse and regret for his own sins. Perhaps that's why he turns his gaze to Beatrice, though it's unmet, thus to let her know what he has learned, that folly is the rule among our kind, the gift of grace undeserved and unearned, the only source of joy we'll ever find. So in that moment, he looks to Beatrice, because of course she's his guide and his beloved when he's in Paradiso, and she's already looking off somewhere else. And this is another thing I love about the story. Dante has this great affection for Virgil, the poet, who is his leader and guide, and he's his master. He depends on him, and then Virgil disappears at the end of Purgatorio, and because he can't go to heaven because Virgil's a pagan. And Dante is just like bereft, he's weeping. He can't lose Virgil. And Beatrice is there, his beloved that he's been searching for all of his life. And she's there like, Dante, quit it. Like, there are other things to cry about. Like, I'm here, Dante, to help you. So again, these very human moments. And then Dante has to get washed in the river of forgetfulness. And that's what the cover is. This is actually a sculpture done by the wonderful wonderful sculptor, Tim Smaltz, Pope Francis's favorite sculptor. He made 100 sculptures of each of the cantos of the Divine Comedy. So this is the one where
Wow.
yeah, and they're amazing. They're all in clay. And this is one where Mathilde, who's one of Beatrice's companions, is bathing Dante in the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. It's a sort of a baptism that's going to wash away all of his sins. And so at that point, when Beatrice is saying, "Stop crying, I'm here," that's when Beatrice takes over and then takes him up to heaven and to tour the Paradiso. But Dante's always like 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps behind Beatrice, not really able to figure out what it is she's showing him. And so there's something just so poignant about him, like trying to understand this great mystery, this vision that he has been given, but feeling like, I don't have the language for this. I don't have a way to express it. And so he's like so humble in front of this vision that he gets.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mortality has certainly been a theme in this conversation. And I mean, we began by talking about Pope Francis passing away, and then We shared a little bit about our childhoods, spiritual journeys, and then your book, Dear Dante, as well, which is all about the afterlife. And I stumbled upon one of your poems, Merton's Surprise. And I mean, gosh, any listeners to this podcast, if they made a drinking game of every time I quoted Merton, I mean, they would they would spend every single episode buzzed. But you have you have a wonderful line in that you write, you saw in Merton, of course, a little background. He died very suddenly at what, the age of 52?
53, yeah.
53 in Bangkok, Thailand. He was electrocuted, and then some may argue it's conspiratorial, but some even say that his political activism got him assassinated or executed. So the point is that he died very young, and I mean, to think that we could have 30, 40 more years of writings from Merton with the spiritual direction he was going into Eastern religions. It's incredible. But so this is the line that comes in your poem, Merton's Surprise. You saw what you were tumbling toward and smiled, as you're describing his death. And I just thought that was a really beautiful and hopeful summary of the afterlife. So yeah, I would like for you to close with one poem from Dear Dante, another one, if you don't mind, but do you have anything to add there about mortality, afterlife, or any other theme from this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I love the reason I wrote the poem, by the way, and mentioned the tumbling is I remember one of Merton's brother monks seeing an interview with him, and and monks are wonderful. They're just so serene. And the interviewer said, "Well, were you sad? Were you surprised when you found out about Merton's death?" And they said, "No, actually, Tom was really clumsy. He was always falling." It amazed us that he made it as far as he did. And so there was just something so, and he laughed. There was something so humanizing about that.
When I heard that line, I mean, I heard it on my run earlier today, and I thought of Pope Francis. I thought of my mom who passed away real suddenly 4 years ago, and yeah, I mean, you saw what you were tumbling toward and smiled. I mean, tumbling is such a beautiful word because, I mean, it kind of points toward the clumsiness of Merton, like you said, but then in this theological exploration, in this creative exploration with the Catholic imagination, I mean, there's a tumbling aspect to it. I mean, it's not linear, it can feel kind of chaotic or out of control as this river kind of opens up to you. But would you mind reading one more poem from Dear Dante and sending us out?
Well, the last poem actually is it's called The Price of Paradise. Um, and this is again that theme that Dante had where he felt as though he has seen so much and there's no way he could find the language to be able to say it, which is kind of hilarious when you think about the fact that we've just read a 14,000 word line poem.
Yeah. Yep.
You seem to have found a lot of language, but he still felt like there's really, I can't tell you, what it is that I've seen. This is just the merest shadow of it. So that really struck me. And so this is the last poem in the book before the epilogues. And it's quotes from Paradiso 33, where he says, "What little I recall is to be told from this point on in words more weak than those of one whose infant tongue still bathes at the breast." And then there's another epigraph from Matthew 18. "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven."
Look at you knowing your Bible.
Thanks to the Protestants. So the price of paradise. The power of speech, the price Dante paid for a brief, fleeting vision of God. Words, his instruments, tools of his trade, simply vanished. The stunned poet saw deep mysteries his tongue could not tell. The fires of purgation, the horrors of hell did not rob him as high heaven did. Lost to himself, he became otherwise, was rendered young and dumb again. This is what happens in paradise. When the soul encounters the Holy One, there is no longer need for a poem. All you have written becomes mere straw, and eternity looms of languageless awe.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, Dr. Angela.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This was a great pleasure.
Once again, that was Dr. Angela Alaimo O'Donnell. You can find all her books on Amazon or visit Paraclete Press's website to order her two most recent poetry books, Dear Dante and Holy Land. You can follow her on Twitter at the handle @O'DonnellAngela or on Instagram at angela.a.o'donnell. I've linked to her books, some of her recent magazine pieces, as well as her social media, as well as to her social media in the show notes of this episode. So thanks for tuning in, and thank you as always for your support. And lastly, thank you to Father Cyprian Concilio for providing the music for this episode. Peace and all good.
I will lead you into the desert with